Hi there, it's Vee from Crafting Daily Dose. Thanks so much for joining me today. I've got a really special pop-up card to share with you. You slide open the belly band, and then when you open it up, there's a surprise pop-up inside. Lots of dimension, and on the back, there is room for a message. I'm not sure of the origin of this fold, but I did see it demonstrated by Barry at Motosu Crafts, and I've got a link to his video in the description box below. Now, when you're doing pop-ups, every fold represents an opportunity to add another element, so I couldn't resist adding to that design by making the flower and the label also pop up as well. This one's going to be a little bit more involved, but don't worry, we'll take it step by step. For this project, I'm using Blackberry Bliss paper. I've got a full sheet here, and then I have another piece that is 9.5 inches wide by 1.5 inches high. I've got these two little strips, but you don't need a separate piece from them because we're going to cut down this larger piece, and you can cut the strips from that. But they are going to end up being 4.5 by 1/2. I've got some basic white panels here. These two are for the front of the card, and they are each 1 3/4 by 5 1/4. And then this one is for the back of the card. It's 2 3/4 by 5 1/4. I'm using some additional papers to stamp and die cut on. So I've got the shimmer vellum in fresh Freesia. I've got soft seafoam and basic white cardstock. I'm using the Artistically inked stamp set along with the matching artistic dies and one of the stitched rectangle dies. And then finally, the ink colors are going to be Old Olive, Rich Razzleberry, and Fresh Freesia. Let's go ahead and get started. So orient your paper in the landscape position, and if you are in the US, you're starting out with a sheet that is 11 inches by 8.5 inches. If you are elsewhere and using A4 paper, your height is only going to be 8 1/4 inches, but that's fine. It really still works the same way. The only thing is that you have to make a slight adjustment in the basic white layer, and I'll mention that again when we get to it. But in either case, you're going to trim it down to 10 inches. And I'll go ahead and use my darker cutting blade here. So that gives me 10 inches. Now I can save the scrap and cut out the little pieces that are needed for the box support mechanism. I'm going to take this larger piece and go ahead and score it. So we're scoring first at 2 inches. So I'm moving the cutting blade safely out of the way and using this lighter gray blade, which is for scoring. 2 inches. Then 3.5. 6.5. And then finally 8. Now I'm going to turn it 90 degrees, and I'm going to be scoring 1.5 inches from each edge. So for this, you can either use the measurement that's here on the left or the one that's on the right. I just find it easier to use the one that's on the right. And for that, it's going to be all the way at this white margin here. Shift it so I can make sure that you can see that. I'm all the way at the end of the white margin. .5 inches from either side. Now I'm going to bring in my snips and I'm going to do some trimming on this piece. So I'm looking here at my horizontal score lines, and I'm going to start at one end and cut to the second vertical score line. So starting here, I meet up with the first score line and I'll go right past that. On to the second one. Now I've got this big long flap here. It's got one score line and then it ends at this other score line, and I'm going to cut about halfway in between those two score lines. Now I'm going to repeat the same thing on all four corners. So on here, I'm cutting across the horizontal score line, past the first one, and ending at the second one. And same as before, I've got this long flap with one score line here and it ends at this one, and I'm going to cut about halfway in between them. It doesn't have to be exact, just cut, you can just eyeball it. So I've done two corners, I've got two more to go. Each of these short pieces is going to be a gluing tab, so it's always a good idea to trim those off a little bit so that they don't show if our gluing is not exactly precise. So all that means is I'm just going to trim off just a tiny bit, a little tiny wedge from each one at the top and at the bottom. So then it looks like this. And I'll do that with the remaining 3 tabs. Now you've got this center panel and 2 tabs on either side. I'm going to mark the center of this panel. It's 3 inches across, and so the halfway point is at 1.5 inches. You can use a separate ruler or you can put it into the trimmer in order to do that. So take this tab and you can bend it up so that now you can see the measurements here. Put it at the 1.5 inch mark. Now you can take a pencil to mark the center of this track. And so the distance from here to the edge is going to be 1.5 inches, which is what you want. Turn it around and do the same thing on this side. I've got a piece here that didn't come off, so let me pull that. I'm putting it at 1.5 inches, marking that center spot. Now, we're going to be using that center mark as well as these corner edges here as a guide for scoring. We want to create diagonal score lines from that center mark to each of those corners. So I'm putting the center mark along the center of my track. I'm going to fold up these pieces here. so that I can see where that corner is. And once I have both of those lined up along the track, like this, I'll use my lighter scoring blade to score that. Then I'm going to turn it, fold this up so I can see where that corner is more easily. Slide it under my guide, put the center mark along the track, and then put this corner along the track. So there you can see we've got those two diagonal score lines. Same thing over here. Now you can use that leftover piece to cut down some additional strips. These are each going to be 4.5 inches across by 1/2 inch high, and we're going to do some scoring on these as well. So score at 1.5 inches. Two inches. 3.5, and 4. And you'll repeat that for both of the strips. On this larger strip, you're going to score at 2 inches. And then at 6 1/8, which is right at this white margin over here. I've got one of the stitched rectangle die cuts. It's one of the smaller ones that's 2 3/8 by 1 1/16. If you don't have the stitched rectangle dies, you can also just cut a piece of cardstock in approximately that size. And normally I would stamp and then die cut, but for this, because I'm going to have to use some masking in order to get my sentiment to fit, and because the stamps are rubber and not clear, I just find it easier to gauge how much space I have if I die cut out the label first. So I'm going to put that right there. I'm using Old Olive ink and the Happy Birthday sentiment, and I want to stamp the happy on one line and then birthday on the other line. So I'm going to go ahead and just use a piece of washi tape to cover up this part of the birthday word. You can also use sticky notes if you'd like. And I'm going to lightly tap my ink. The washi tape here is just a little bit of extra insurance that I don't get ink where I don't want it to be. So once I've inked up my stamp, I can remove this and then position my stamp over the die cut. And then I'm just going to wipe this off well. When you've done some masking like that, it's always a good idea to stamp it off onto some scrap paper just to make sure that you're not seeing any residual ink. Now I'm going to put this back, and this time I'm going to cover the happy, and I'll ink that up. And then I'll stamp the second part of my sentiment. Now, if you're outside the US and using A4 paper, then trim down your white panel so that the long dimension is only 5 inches instead of 5 1/4 like mine are. For the basic white layers that go on the front of the card, I'm using a combination of fresh Freesia and rich Razzleberry. I'm using daubers to apply the ink to my stamp, just because for this particular stamp set, it just gives a nicer, lighter, more wispy look. And I'm going to be sort of randomly choosing between these two to ink it on. I've got my paper on top of a silicone mat because I'm going to be doing a lot of stamping off the edge. So when I dab on the ink, I'm starting with my lighter color first. And then I'll come in with the darker color, mostly around the edges. But it really doesn't matter. I'm going to be changing up my angles some and also doing some second generation stamping without re-inking in between. I'm letting some of those areas overlap with one another. And I ended up with sort of a harsh line here where that color transitions, so I will do some stamping on top of that to disguise that. The stamp is just really fun to do, and I like to make sure to leave a little bit of white space as well. So I'm going to finish stamping up the other panel in the same way. I'm also stamping just a small border for the piece on the back panel. I'm going to stamp my flower images, and I'm starting with the vellum because it's going to take longer to dry on this. And because the vellum is going to just barely peek out from other layers, I'm just going to stamp directly and not use the daubers this time. Now remember to set the vellum aside and make sure that it's dry before you try to die cut it. You may even have to help it along with your heat tool. I'll be stamping the different flower sizes onto the basic white cardstock, and for this I'm returning back to the daubers. After I've stamped and die cut all the pieces, this is what I end up with. So I have one of the large flowers on cardstock and one on vellum. I have 4 of the mediums on cardstock and 4 on vellum, 4 of the small ones on cardstock, and then I have 6 total of the smallest ones. So the stamp and the die set create 3 at a time, so this is 2 sets. One's been stamped in fresh Freesia and one in rich Razzleberry, and then I have 2 of these leaf die cuts in soft seafoam. Before I assemble my flowers together, I'm going to add some extra dimension to some of the pieces. And to do that, I'm using the stylus from the scoring board. There's also a stylus attachment for the Pick-a tool. And I'm working with the cardstock on top of a foam mat. This is the foam mat from my Stamparatus. You can also use like a mouse pad or a piece of craft foam. Now, if you're using the tool from the scoring board, there's two sizes. This is the smaller stylus, and then this is the larger one, and I'm using the larger one. And all I'm going to do is press down on the middle of my flower and kind of make some swirls here. And that's going to cause it to sort of ruffle up a little bit. I'm also creating some creases, kind of where the petals would be separated. And then I'm going to use my fingers to just curl everything. And all of this is just to give it extra texture. So you can see how it's no longer flat, just adds a little extra interest. And I'll do the same thing here. I'll kind of curl the edges up and kind of create those swirls here in the middle. And that just makes everything kind of ruffled. Now I'm going to use my glue dots just in the center of these flowers, or these flower pieces. And then I'm going to start layering them on top of one another. Now for the large flower, I want to be careful. There's one dimension that's a little bit wider and one that's a little bit skinnier. And that's going to be important when we place this into our card because the space there is limited. And so I want to pay attention to which side is less wide. And I want to make sure that as I layer the vellum piece underneath it, that I keep it so that I haven't made it any wider. I can make it longer, but I just don't want to make it wider. Okay, and you can see that the vellum is just going to peek out a little bit. Next, I'm layering this medium-sized piece from the vellum. Put that there. Then this piece. And I'm positioning it just so I can see a little bit of the other layer underneath. And then finally one of these pieces, and I'm not distressing this since this will be completely visible. These other flowers are going to be smaller because they're not going to have that bottom large layer, and I'll assemble all four of them in the same way. Now we're going to assemble our card. So we're going to fold along the score lines and reinforce with the bone folder. These two that are on the outside are going to be mountain folds, so you're going to fold away from you. The two inner score lines are going to be valley folds, so fold towards you. Now we'll do this horizontal one. This is going to be a valley fold. Fold it towards you. Now the diagonal score lines are going to be folded away from you. So you can actually leave it down like this and then just flip these up like so. And then these gluing tabs here are going to be folded down. And we'll repeat it for the one on the other side. So fold this towards you. Flip those diagonal score lines back up. And then fold those gluing tabs down. Now that it's clear where all of our separate panels are, let's go ahead and put on the white layers next. It's easier to do that now before the box is assembled. So I'm going to center one of the panels on the right side and one on the left side. And then the back panel gets centered in the middle. I'm going to do a rough layout. I'm putting my large flower here. I want to distance it maybe about 1/2 inch from this top edge right here. And I want to make sure that the skinnier part goes horizontally across this way. I'll tuck another flower underneath here. Put my label here. And both the large flower and the label are going to be the parts that pop up. And so I'm giving them some clearance from the top and the bottom edges so that they don't interfere with the parts of the box that are also going to be moving. Okay, the leaves and the two smaller flowers are not going to be moving, and so I will go ahead and adhere them down. I'll use glue for the leaves and I'll use glue dots for the flowers since the bottom layer is vellum and the glue dots tend to work better for the vellum. Okay, once the stationary elements are in place, we're going to go ahead and assemble the box. So to do this, we'll start with one side. We're going to fold it down just like we did previously. So fold this crease down, flip up the diagonal creases, and then fold down the glue tabs. Go ahead and put glue on them. Make sure as you're doing this that you get all the way to that crease. And when you're ready, hold that down and then fold down the sides on top of it. And if you prefer, you can do just one side at a time. You're going to hold it there for a little bit and really let that glue set up. Then gently lift it up and see if it seems set. Okay, that looks good. Now we're going to do the same thing down here. So we're going to fold this all the way down, like this, as much as we can, and then flip open these diagonal folds, and then flip up the gluing tabs. And I'm going to turn it because it's easier for me to work with that way. Okay, and then you're going to want to put glue on these. And then fold the other panels down on top. Press it, let it set, and then slowly lift it up and see. All right, that's looking very good. Now I'm going to turn it back the other way so I don't confuse myself, because originally I meant for this to be the top. Now we're going to assemble those little skinny strips, and all of these 4 score lines are going to be mountain folds. So mountain, 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 mountain. You're going to see 2 short panels that are right next to each other, and so the last one is going to be a gluing tab. Now I'm not going to bother to trim the wedge off of these because no one's going to see it, but I'm going to go ahead and put glue on that last little tab, and now I'm going to fold it down at the score line that was just before it, so it looks like this. Once I have that, then I'm going to score down my other piece, my other side, at this last score line on the right. And when I do that, they're going to overlap with one another. But you can see that it's going to fold down perfectly flat. And once that glue has set and you pop it open, from the side, it looks like a little box. So this is a box support for our pop-up. We're going to construct the other one in exactly the same way. So mountain, 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 mountain. Glue on that last tab. Fold it down from the score line next to it, and then fold this down from the last score line on the right, they'll overlap, press them together, and then they'll pop open like this. Now, one of these is going to be up here, supporting our large flower, and one of them is going to be down here, supporting the happy birthday label. So, like this. Let's start with the one at the top. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick one of these long panels. It doesn't really matter which one. I'm going to go ahead and put glue on it. And I'm going to put it down on the bottom of the card here, lining up this edge right up against the fold. So here's the long piece that has glue. There's no glue here on the short edge. I'm going to press it down like this and wedge it up there. And I want to give it at least maybe like an inch or so from that top surface. Because what's going to happen is that when the card closes up, this other piece is going to be moving as well. And we just don't want those to interfere too much with one another. So we're letting this piece set up. And once that looks like it's adhered well, now I'm going to go back and put glue on this little short panel right here. I want to get right up to the crease. It looks like this. And now you can probably guess we are going to fold the card down flat so that we're pressing this panel up against the glue. And we're going to let that set. So you can see how as the card opens and closes, this box support is going to be moving, and so whatever we stick on top of it is also going to be moving. And then we're going to install the other one down here. So pick a long panel, fold it down flat, pick a long panel, put it at least an inch or so above this bottom edge and right up to that crease. Now mine may overlap with the flower a little bit, but that's fine. Let that set up. And then I'm putting glue just on this short panel right here. Right up to the crease. It looks like this. I'm going to fold everything down flat again. And I'm pressing up against where that tab is underneath. Now take your large flower and we're going to place it onto this support here. I'm using a glue dot for that. And actually I'm going to use 2 just for good measure. So I've got 2 glue dots on there. Kind of putting my fingers here so I keep track of where those dots are. And I'll put them in place. I'm not pressing too hard yet because I'm going to test it first and make sure that things are not bumping up against one another, because I may have to move it if it is. Now, when you're first doing it, you kind of have to train the paper a little bit. But after a while, that mechanism gets more smooth. Okay, so everything folded down flat. And everything fits, so that's great. Now I'm going to put my label on, but before I do that, I'm going to decorate it a little bit. I'm going to put a few of these small flowers on there. Okay, now I'm going to put glue all along this long tab up here. And I'm going to place my label on top of it. And I'm going to place my hand kind of underneath the label, inside of that little box structure, just so I can press those pieces up against one another. And I'll close it back down. Press everything. Now the only other thing that we need to do is to make our belly band. So that's this longer strip here. We've got 2 score lines, make them both mountain folds. And before you go further, just double check and make sure that it's going to fit around your card. So that seems like it's okay and not too tight. If it does feel tight and it's hard to slip on and off, then just go ahead and make a new little score line on the side, and that will give you a little bit more wiggle room. So if everything fits okay, I'm going to fit the ends together. So I'm just going to trim a little bit off of this longer end here, just a little tiny wedge shape. You can use glue for this as well, but I'm going to go ahead and put some Stampin' Seal on the top of this longer end. And then I'm going to put some Stampin' Seal on what's going to be the bottom of this shorter end. So that when you put them together, they're going to come together like that. And you've got your belly band. I'm bringing in the second leaf die cut, and I'll go ahead and trim it down here again. So it's going to have this die cut And then our last little flower. So let's go ahead and glue that down. And I'll add on some of the littlest flowers too. This belly band is going to go over the card, and actually I think I like it better in this direction, so I'll slide it on this way. So that's our completed card. I hope that you've enjoyed this dose of creativity and that you'll have a chance to try it out yourself. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you next time, and until then, have a great day.